say to thee, have mercy. Have mercy.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast. I am Tony James, and these are the bells of justice, and they're always ringing. Hey, I want to welcome you to this episode of the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling. We're going to dive deep into a topic where you're going to have to put on your thinking cap today. But before we do, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors. So we'll return after these brief messages. Today's podcast is brought to you by Three Brothers RC. They are the only place to go for RC products. Also, Southpaw Boxing Club. It's time. Right now is your time to get started on your health and fitness, and Southpaw Boxing Club is the place to go for that. And finally, Jose Sanchez Boots. They've been in business since 1963. They are the end-all, be-all when it comes to boots. We want to thank all three sponsors here at the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast, and we ask that you reach out to them. That is Three Brothers RC, Southpaw Boxing Club, and Jose Sanchez Boots. Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We are on Spotify. Hit follow. We are on YouTube. Hit subscribe. And, of course, you can find me on Facebook, Outlaw Tony James. Today we're going to be talking about, it stems from the Konnan podcast with Disco Inferno, where they're talking about Bret Hart burying John Moxley. Well, I'm going to play a clip for you from that here soon, and we're going to discuss that. But basically, the difference between modern wrestling and what some people call old school or golden day wrestling, golden era wrestling, you're either on one side or the other. And I think Konnan makes an excellent point in his podcast. So as we get deep into this, I want to play that clip for you, and then I want to discuss that a little bit. But you do have to think wrestling has changed, and there has been evolution. And if you remember, back in the early 80s, right when the shift occurred in January of 84 when Hogan took the title, they always talk about wanting to take it out of war memorials and pool halls and the smoke-filled rooms, and they wanted to transcend into, you had the rock and wrestling connection, you had celebrities coming in, and you were trying to make it mainstream. And that group at that time always talked about putting guys in headlocks for 25 minutes and only one or two moves, and trying to evolve wrestling. So wrestling is always going to evolve. What it evolves to, and if you like it or not, that's kind of where you fall. Do you like where it's going? Do you enjoy? I know myself, I enjoy watching old stuff more than I do watching new stuff. There are fewer wrestlers today that I follow, whereas back in the day, of course, I had my favorite, but then I was able to watch all the shows all the time. So when I go back and watch old Madison Square Garden, Saturday Night Main Events, NWA, Crockett Promotion stuff, whatever it may be, even AWA and World Class, most matches are entertaining, believable, and you get into them, where nowadays, depending on what side you fall on, it may not be so much, at least in my opinion. I feel, with that being said, it also affects independent wrestling. I believe that those who wrestle, as some people deem old school, or even called the original way, right, are few and far between. And when you can find those wrestlers, I believe you have a lot more room for growth, making money, and putting a program together where you can string multiple matches. Whereas if the modern style is predominant in your company or move set or in your matches, there's only so much you can do because I feel the fan sees it all within that first, maybe even second match. And at the end of the day, where I fall, I believe that fans, it's up to the fans. What do the fans want to see? It's been told to me a couple times that if you went West Coast, if you went here, if you went to this promotion, they probably couldn't book you, or you probably wouldn't get over because of the style. There's probably some truth to that, because fans now know what they want, and they go to see promotions in the indie scene. They see promotions, and they go to those promotions with the style they want to see. Bottom line, they're not there to buy merchandise or anything else. Whereas WWE and all these bigger companies, you're getting an experience with wrestling sprinkled in, and you've got all the options for merchandise and everything else going to a big arena. And whereas once again, if you go to an independent show, what draws you in, it's the wrestlers and wanting to see certain matchups. So that's another aspect we can touch upon as we talk about this today. But with that being said, of course, you can get on YouTube and go to Keep It at 100 there with Konnan and Disco Inferno. This episode comes from the Bret Hart bearing Jon Moxley. With that being said, let's take a listen to this clip that is owned by Konnan and Disco Inferno's podcast.
Bret says the old kind of wrestling is sorely missed by a lot of people. If the old wrestling was around like my dad's wrestling, we'd come see it. I'm trying to advise my son Dallas and help him deliver the kind of wrestling show that I would enjoy watching, where the wrestlers actually know what a headlock is rather than doing the scripted ballet and leaping, twirling, and dancing around like a bunch of ballet dancers. I don't really enjoy today's wrestling for those reasons. They lost a lot of the steps towards the reality and credibility of wrestling. Wrestling, in my opinion, needs to pretend to be real. It always has pretended really hard, almost to the point that you believe it's real. Wrestling is so far-fetched today. When I think of WWE and see 20 wrestlers crowded together outside on the floor, and someone dives over the top rope and knocks them all down like bowling pins, I roll my eyes at how pathetic wrestling is today. Top to bottom, all the top wrestlers and all the middle bottom wrestlers in WWE and AEW all slapping their leg on every punch and slap. It's to the point where I can't watch wrestling today. Sadly, it's getting too phony. I really question the direction that the people that are in charge are taking wrestling. AEW has gone in a bad direction with all the violence and gore. I watched an episode, Dr. Martha Hart doing her big press conference. I'm watching AEW, and Moxley is sticking a fork in somebody's head for 5 minutes with a close-up. This isn't wrestling. I would recommend turning all that off and not watching because it's not very good. Wrestling is going in bad directions because people don't know what wrestling is or was. There's a little more. Do you want to comment on that first or hear the rest?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I say this, and have been saying this repeatedly, and it's like when Bret Hart says, it's like, oh, it must be true now. Like I don't know what I'm talking about. It's bro, he literally, and I contend, and I've said this, bro. The work has a lot to do with losing fans. It is a lot more phony than it used to be, and then the people, like I said, when you're watching 7 hours of TV each week of wrestling, and you see all the thigh slapping and stuff, I think it's very difficult to get in to think that, like, okay, I'm suspending disbelief and this is a real fight. You know, it's like, and I said it's like almost an epidemic. You know, and like Bret agrees, and I think it causes the loss of viewers. And I would contend that our style back in the day, were the details were we were very good with details and strikes. You know, like punches and stuff like that. Like everybody could throw a punch. Everybody looked like they could fight. I think that's a big deal. You know, would you agree with that, Konnan, or am I off?
Yeah, no, I would agree with everything he said and you said. I think my point of view on this, though, is when he says, oh, we're not watching wrestling anymore, you know, well, you are. It's modern wrestling, unfortunately. That's what you're watching.
Right.
And if you run off fans, it's probably older fans that was used to the better, more realistic style. But now you got to start thinking every fan after like 2005 or whatever the year started to get really goofy, you know, they don't know any better. And that's what they're used to. And the next fan base will be used to that too. And they might even get goofier. You know what I'm saying? But I will say this, WWE's done a really good job of most of their matches are logical and believable and good, but they like to throw a lot of entertainment in there, which entertainment was always a part of wrestling, but not as much as it is now. Yeah.
Well, I would disagree with. I'm going to disagree with one thing here that you're saying. I think this new style, bro. Wrestling is not drawing new fans, And I think this has a lot to do with it. It's like, the older fans, like remember, like in 2000, in the year 2001, I think the median age of the fan was 27 years old. 21 years later, the median age of the fan is like 51.
Yeah.
That shows that wrestling is not drawing new fans. It's like the fans are literally getting.
But isn't that weird that the oldest fans who should not like the show are watching it?
That's what they say. I don't trust that, man.
And I don't know because I'll give you an example.
Yeah. But Disco, you don't go to shows. You don't see the live crowd. It's not just a bunch of 51-year-olds and above, or in that. You know what I'm saying? It's everybody.
No. But the television viewer, but professional wrestling, right? It's like a habit. Like wrestling is on every single week. So like your older fans, when you grow up and for 10 years you watch wrestling every week, it's very difficult to get out of that habit of watching wrestling.
Okay, so I think there's a couple good points there at the end, mate. I definitely agree with Konnan when he talks about you are watching wrestling. The current product is wrestling, whether you call it modern wrestling. We've been calling they've been talking about acrobatic and all that for a while now, but I believe Konnan said he thought it started around 2005. Whatever it may be, that is wrestling today. And just like the decades before, as it was going into the late 70s, early 80s, and it started to make a shift from the 50s and 60s, you have another shift. Now, I don't think the shift is as big or as potent or as social as it happened in the early to mid 80s. That was huge. All you have to do is watch any of these documentaries now and look at the impact. I don't think people realize the impact that pro wrestling, that went from this being looked down upon thing to mainstream being everywhere. That was a huge paradigm shift, and I don't think that has happened since, because everything's been built off of that. Even in the 90s when they brought celebrities in, even in WCW, the Monday Night Wars, the formula's been the same. So I don't know if there's been a huge paradigm shift to where it's going in a different direction. I think it may have topped out and hit the ceiling. However, what you're seeing today is modern wrestling. So when independent guys talk about who they are influenced by, odds are they're going to talk about people from around 2005 or beyond, or maybe in the late 90s, depending on the age. A lot of the older guys, including me, might still talk and follow the old style. I don't want to say formula, because not everybody wrestles the same and aren't as predictable as other wrestlers from that era. Same thing with the new stuff. You can be predictable even if it's considered modern wrestling. So I definitely agree with Konnan when he's saying that what you're seeing is modern wrestling. You don't necessarily have to like it, but that's what it is. So you got to give props to the people who are doing today. What you see is what you get. And then with Disco talking about not growing an audience, and I do agree that fans watch wrestling. When you watch it long enough, even if you stop for a while, you come back to it, you're aware of it, you are a pro wrestling fan. Now, as it pertains to the independent circuit, I do believe this. Fans want action, and they want what they want. Now, the fans are different, however. So if you have a fan base that is more traditional pro wrestling, they are probably, after the first couple matches in a modern event, are probably going to be tired and be like, we've seen this already. Whereas if a modern event used more traditional or old school style wrestlers, who knows if they'll get over. I've watched independent shows where the fans get restless and start chanting, do a flip, get a table, land here, do this, do that, 480, all these things, because they are conditioned to wanting to see that in every match. Whereas your more old school or traditional fans, like the progression, are more involved in who is wrestling, not how they're doing it, and they are more into paying more attention to the smaller things. Whereas the more modern day crowd, they're okay with seeing the same match over and over again, because they want to compare on who did it better and who gets the higher rating. Whereas your old school or your more traditional style fan base in independent wrestling, in my opinion, want to walk out saying certain things about certain matches, not necessarily ranking it or using the more modern style fan. So I think even though wrestling has morphed into what we consider modern style, I believe the fan has as well. I can say I'm stuck in a time warp because there's a certain point I won't go past when it comes to watching certain matches. Now, I will dive deep into independent wrestling all day because I like to see what's going on, who the up-and-comers are, and what's hot and what's not. And so I like to watch a lot of that stuff, and that's why we always try to promote indie wrestlers when we can, when we find a good one, because we want you to go out and either watch their stuff or see them live, because when it's done well, it is great. With that being said, I have a very small selective group of wrestlers that I like to watch when it comes to modern day and or what's on TV. So I definitely agree with that. Now, with what Bret Hart said, that kind of goes a little bit with what I'm discussing here today. Look at Bret Hart, look where he came from, and look at the footprint he's left on pro wrestling. It's definitely opposite of what he used to do and probably his expectations of what is. So the bottom line is, what sells tickets? What sells tickets? And if you get on Al Snow's, there's a podcast out there, and all you got to do is type in Al Snow on Modern Wrestling Psychology. It was from a year ago. Like I said, he sticks to mostly tag team stuff. But he makes a comment about a formula, a 7-step formula, and he doesn't believe in it. There's a thought process when you go to an event, when you go to and put matches together, what you want to see and what you don't want to see, and that's a wide range as well. I know personally I want to see quality over quantity, and I want to see it consistently throughout when I go to a wrestling match, when I watch it online or if I watch it on TV. If too many times you're getting up and taking a break, or this is a good time to look at my phone, or this is a good time to go to the concession stand, or this is a good time to go into the other room, it's telling you something. That's telling you something as a fan. And if it's a live event, hopefully the promoter and the people involved are taking a look at that, and they're working on that as well. So those are a couple tidbits there from the Konnan comment about Bret Hart supposedly burying Jon Moxley. I don't know if he's really burying him. He's just giving him his opinion. Now, I know Bret Hart gives his opinion a lot on a lot of different wrestlers, but with that being said, I wanted to share that clip with you and see if you guys have any opinions. If you do, don't be afraid to leave them in the comments. Once again, this is the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling of Tony James podcast. It's on Spotify. Hit follow. We're also on YouTube. Hit subscribe. Leave comments if you'd like. And then you can always find me on Outlaw Tony James on Facebook. This time I'd like to take a brief break to once again tip my hat to my great sponsors, and we'll be right back after this. Today's podcast is brought to you by Three Brothers RC. They are the only place to go for RC products. Also, Southpaw Boxing Club. It's time. Right now is your time to get started on your health and fitness, and Southpaw Boxing Club is the place to go for that. And finally, Jose Sanchez Boots. They've been in business since 1963. They are the end-all, be-all when it comes to boots. We want to thank all three sponsors here at the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast, and we ask that you reach out to them. That is Three Brothers RC, Southpaw Boxing Club, and Jose Sanchez Boots. Welcome back. This is the Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling, a Tony James podcast. Now, we were just talking about the clip I shared from Konnan and Disco, and I've got a quick 1-minute clip called What Does Eric Bischoff Appreciate Most About Wrestling? And this kind of leans towards more of in-ring, comparing modern day to traditional or your old school. So I'm going to play this quote for you, and then we're going to take a look at it and see what we can dig out of it. So here we go. Eric Bischoff.
But the art of wrestling goes beyond the art of telling a story in the ring. The art of wrestling, in my opinion, and I know a lot of people will hate this opinion, and you'll think I'm discrediting those athletic, high-flying, risk-taking performers out there, and I don't mean to. But to me, the art that I appreciate the most, even though I appreciate the rest of it, is the art of telling a story. And whenever you can take a successful wrestling story and break it down with someone like Tom that's capable of doing it and compare it to classic literature, or at least elements of it that existed in other great stories, I think it pays a certain respect to what we all enjoy every week.
So I think and I agree with Eric Bischoff, it's about the story and about the character, and I don't think it's a shot at all at the athletic wrestlers. I think you can either get your character over or you can't. There's certain things you can do to hide it. I think if you can't get your character over in the ring, I don't know if you can cut a good promo or talk people into the building. If you're awesome in the ring, but you're not good on the mic, that can somewhat, I believe, cover if you can't. It can hide or cover some of the things you can't do to get your character over. There are some guys, be it on the indies or be it on the big stage, where you may not think they can do a lick of things in the ring, but I'm going to tell you what, they can get the crowd on fire. And that's about getting your character over. At the end of the day, it's investment. So the modern fans, in my opinion, are invested on seeing certain moves because all the wrestlers look the same. On the indie circuit, in my opinion, guys who can't do those moves but think they can, and they do them consistently, aren't getting over, aren't putting butts in the seats. I believe it's probably harder in the modern era to get people to come and see you because everybody can do what you do. There's just a slide, a grading scale, so to speak, a slide scale of how well you can do it. The guys who do it really well, and I mean really well, I've watched their matches, I followed them, and they either get pulled into the performance center or by some of the big companies and they get a little stint, or they're constantly getting booked on the really good indie shows. The guys who are in the middle of the road who know how to do a hybrid of what we consider traditional, depending on their audience, and doing some modern stuff, I think they can put butts in the seats and they're decent. And then you got the guys who think they know what they're doing, and they're either not trained or they're trained and they don't know what they're doing, but they just don't know what they're doing. And you can push a guy, you can talk about how great and how high he can fly, but when you sit down and watch his match, I ask you, if you watch it on YouTube, find a guy, watch what they're doing in the front row, watch how they're reacting, listen to the match, because I'm telling you right now, thanks to that WrestleMania match, chops are back, baby. And I know, hey, so I don't chop, and I won't. Sometimes I do, and recently I threw one. Other than that, it's not because I saw it on TV either. If someone's going to smack me, I'm going to smack them back. Other than that, though, that triple threat slugfest, if you don't look like those guys, don't be slugging. But guys do it. Same thing with the high flyers. So getting back to what Bischoff said, I do agree. Of course, he owns his own clips. We don't here at The Good, the Bad, and the Wrestling. But getting back to that comment, I believe what sells tickets, what makes money, and what brings fans back are the stories, the guys in the ring who get you invested in who they are. And I don't want to say character, because I believe if you do it right, the guy you see in the ring or girl you see in the ring, that's them just turned up. You listen to all the guys and girls, men and women, however you want to address them. The successful ones always say, well, that's just me, just turned up 3 more notches. That's just me, but to 10. Those are the ones that are successful because they believe it, they live it, they get in the ring, and they are able to transfer and communicate that experience to the fans. And it has nothing to do with how high they fly or what they can get across. Now, when it comes to guys who come out and they don't do high-flying moves and they just want to do certain moves, if they can't get themselves over, fans don't want to see that either. It's about time these indie shows start respecting the fans, and also on the other end, don't become one of those monkeys with the cymbals clapping your hands together. Dance for me, do this, do that, because at the end of the day, they leave and go home. You put yourself through light tubes, a board, a table, or you slip and fall. Where does that leave you? They're not paying the bills. Why are you doing it? Why are you in the ring? So to me, it's who you are, not necessarily all the time how you do it. So I definitely agree with Eric Bischoff there. You tell me what you think. Please feel free to leave a comment. We're on YouTube. Hit subscribe. We're on Spotify. Hit follow. And as always, you can follow me on Outlaw Tony James on Facebook. I just wanted to get my opinion out there. We could go deep into this, and I'd rather do it with a panel than just giving my opinion. So don't be afraid to jump out there and check things out, and hit me up with some comments on YouTube. Also, you can go to Outlaw Tony James on YouTube if you would like to check out some of my matches. I just had a great match, a hard match, a knockdown drag-out match. Dare I say, sometimes you got to get your butt whooped, and I got my butt whooped a little bit on April 15th. I was in the ring with handsome Nick Hamrick, and he kind of throttled me a little bit. I was able to get a little bit back on him, and then wouldn't you know, somebody had to stick their nose in my business, public business, if you will. And I'm not too happy about that. So you got one up on me today, boys. Savor the flavor, because it's not going to last long. You can watch that match on Outlaw Tony James on YouTube. It's posted there. Like I said, you can always find stuff on Facebook with Outlaw Tony James. And then once again, the good, the bad, and the wrestling, a Tony James podcast. You can find us on Spotify. Hit follow. You can find us at YouTube. Hit subscribe. I'm just so happy to be talking about wrestling with you today. I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be bringing back some panel members so we can go deeper into these topics. But once again, wrestling is wrestling how you like it. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. God is good, and we will see you at the matches.